So, good afternoon and namaskar, ladies and gentlemen. We are ready to carry forward the proceedings of this event. Once again, a very warm welcome and thanks to all our exhibitors, session panelists, and visitors to the inaugural PHDH virtual event. And I hope you have visited the wonderful exhibits. Several Indian and foreign companies are participating, and we encourage you to see the displays after this session or at any time till September 25th. We also encourage you to inform your friends and colleagues to register and participate in the several sessions that are scheduled over the next 3 days. We are aware that many foreign delegates are in the audience, and we thank them once again for attending this event despite the time difference. And now we are all set to begin with the next panel discussion, which is on ramping up COVID-19 testing to restart the economy. And distinguished moderator for this panel discussion is Ms. Acharya, CEO of MapMyGenome. And our panelists are Mr. Amit Chopra, MD, Thermo Fisher Scientific, Dr. Shahid Jameel, former CEO of Wellcome Trust DBT India Alliance, Dr. Chetan Tamhankar, Head Clinical Department, Syngene International, and Dr. Vishal Warke, Director, HiMedia Laboratories. So, ladies and gentlemen, testing, testing, testing are the words that all of us have been hearing almost daily over the past 8 months. Since the COVID-19 pandemic began, now, since economies around the world have decided to unlock, the key to control and manage the spread seems to be the testing strategy. Beginning from a handful of COVID testing in early 2020, India now has over 1,700 labs doing about 1 million tests a day. To discuss the current scenario and future COVID testing plans, we have five panelists representing the whole spectrum of enablers. And once again, Ms. Anu Acharya from MapMyGenome will moderate this session. And may I invite you, ma'am, to kindly take over and initiate the session. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Sapna. Thank you, Sapna, for the kind introduction. I think today we have an excellent panel. I think while you have introduced, I think Dr. Shahid Jameel is a virologist and does, he has taken over many different responsibilities, but I think he also understands it from a virus point of view. And we have Amit Chopra, who represent mostly a lot of what the multinationals can bring to the table, being one of the leading companies that have been working on a lot of the RT-PCR and many other kits that are there. We have also Chetan, who's representing Syngene, and Syngene has come up with many different, not only just services, but also have come up with COVID testing kits as well. And of course, HiMedia that has become one of the more very well-known Indian companies that have scaled up a lot in terms of the collection kits and many other spaces that required in the COVID testing arena. So while as a country, I think we heard that we have scaled up quite significantly from a few hundreds and thousands to 10 to 11 tests a day. I think it does say that the country has scaled up, but the question really is, have we become Atmanirbhar, and is it something that we are ready for the future? The second thing, obviously, is the fact that there will be many more pandemics or many other things that will come up. The question is, are we prepared? But I think the question that's on everybody's mind is, how do we open up this economy safely, and how can we discuss about that in the different aspects? Because clearly, I think when we scale up and we do mass testing, there are also areas of how do we look at people coming back to work in corporations, people coming back to educational institutions, people at the other points of entry, whether it is at the airports, whether it is at the railways, and many other things, and so on. And also there is obviously a question of whether there is something known as an immunity passport and so on. So I would like to get started with our panel saying that we have many different types of testing, right? There is there's obviously the gold standard RT-PCR, but there are also many other forms of testing that we started to hear about. There's a new approved test for CRISPR and others. Amit, can you talk to us a little bit about, what are the different forms, and do you feel that there are new forms of testing that we will see in the future as well.
Sorry, I was on mute. Sure, Anu. So thank you for having me on this forum, and very warm hello to everyone. Um, you know, as you all know, that RT-PCR has evolved as a gold standard in testing over the years, not just for COVID, but also for many other infectious diseases. And it's a proven platform with very high accuracy and very high specificity. I think what is the innovation that's happening in the world of testing is very exciting. We heard about the CRISPR testing that has just been launched. Of course, the antigen testing has been around now for a few months. And even though it has low specificity compared to the RT-PCR, it certainly plays a useful role. There is the RT-LAMP testing, which eliminates the steps required from extraction and straight away gets into the nucleic acid testing. So there are multiple types of testing available. I think what one has to look at is what is a proven platform and what is a scaled up platform, because in a time like this, when we needed testing to be available or accurate testing to be available in India all across the country, RT-PCR thankfully came to the rescue, because India already had a wide base of RT-PCRs. In fact, Anu, when we were working in the month of March with the Ministry of Health, with ICMR, through the Night Health Forum, and we were talking to several senior leaders, one of the suggestions we made was to leverage the existing base of RT-PCRs, which was lying in scientific institutions and colleges and in many other areas which were not doing testing. And that's one of the reasons why we as a country could scale up testing, was that a lot of the RT-PCR sort of unutilized capacity got utilized, and we were deeply involved in making sure, along with other manufacturers as well. So I think when we look at the ability to scale, the ability to have a clinically proven, globally proven platform, our platform is used in more than 50 countries. We're producing 10 million tests per week. RT-PCR at this point in time is still the gold standard, and is still the test which is widely used and is widely available. And of course, volumes have driven down the prices also dramatically of the testing kits. I'm sure that there will be more innovation and more exciting point of care tests that will be launched, and that have been launched already, for example, from Abbott and so on. How quickly can they scale up? What is the clinical efficacy of these tests, and that is to be seen, which I think would be very interesting to watch. But I think at this point in time, for large scaled, reliable testing, RT-PCR, in my view, is still the gold standard.
Thank you. So Dr. Shahid, I want to get to you. You are a virologist. You understand, how, the structure of the virus and all of that. Why do you think that, even though there are tests like RT-PCR that are probably much more accurate, why is it that we start to see so much antigen testing happening across the country and also maybe across the world? If you can give us a sense of that.
Well, I think one of the reasons is likely that the antigen testing results are available far more quickly. Yes, I do agree with Amit that there's a very wide base of RT-PCR testing facility available in the country, but it's a test that requires trained manpower. It's a test that requires, dedicated equipment. And just the nature of the test, it takes a couple of hours to do it. Whereas a rapid antigen test takes only minutes to do. In the PCR, even in the best of situations in the country, in Delhi, I've seen tests are available in 24 hours. But there are other places where tests are not available for 8 to 10 days. And surely nobody can wait that long. The other thing is, I'll tell you my own experience. I had to go to a hospital for a non-COVID illness. And before I could see the doctor, I was given an antigen test. So an antigen test is very useful in that sense that, when you're waiting to see a doctor, for example, you can get a test done and the doctor is at least 50% sure that you don't have, you're not going to expose him or her. So, the antigen test is useful in some contexts, but certainly it's not good in the context of measuring the confirmed cases on a countrywide basis. I do agree that the gold standard remains RT-PCR, and surely India has expanded its capacity tremendously over the past few months. So all I'm saying is that context is important. There are certain situations where an antigen test would be more useful and is being done, but people need to understand that a negative in an antigen test does not mean negative. Even in a PCR test, the field sensitivity is coming to around 80%. The field sensitivity is not the 95+%. So even there is a window of doubt. So, these things have to be kept in mind when you talk about testing.
So you would suggest that if somebody needed to be absolutely sure, it's important to connect at least two variables, whether it's a clinical outcome and the test, before we. Yep. And I think for an average person, I think it's important to understand that the antigen test is not something that can prove that you are negative, but it might be helpful in cases where you might want to check quickly if somebody is positive. So if you do get a negative result, it still needs to be, at least from what ICMR guidelines are, it was supposed to be followed with the RT-PCR test. So I think with that, I'd like to move to say, have we been able to scale up supplies? And I think with that, Vishal, I'd like to move to you to say that, you were one of the early, companies that were able to scale up. And do you think that scale up has happened and how Indian manufacturers scaled up, but also was it easy for you to scale up? And that would be helpful to know.
Thank you very much, Anu, for having me on this call, on this panel discussion. Of course, nothing has been easy in the COVID era. And especially when the lockdown was announced, and suddenly everything went into a lockdown in the last week of March. At that time, just to give you an anecdotal example, and I'm sure what I'm saying would be echoed by many other manufacturers in India. So by my example, I'm kind of also trying to echo their sentiments. What happened was we were manufacturing the VTM test kits in India for the last 11, 12 years for detection of swine flu primarily, because that's what it was developed for and it was being used for that. And we were making something like 5 lakh tests or 500,000 tests per annum. And then we got a call from DPIIT and they said that you are the only ones right now who are making this test in India and we have to ramp it up because we have 135 crore population, 1.35 billion. So you have to ramp up as soon as possible, as much as you can. So we set up ramping up and we invested heavily. We did a lot of changes in the infrastructure. We brought the different manufacturing sites that we have brought into play. And we were able to scale up in a month and a half to 1 million tests per day. From 500,000 per year, we scaled up to 1 million tests per day.
Wow.
And so this is something which we were able to do, and a lot of ingenuity had to be brought in, and a lot of components had to be imported because certain components are not being made in India even right now. And that's something we have to also address. If we have to open up the economy and we have to scale up the testing, we would need components to be made in India. A lot of kits and tests are made in India, but the vital components needed for those, so the raw material or the support infrastructure has to be set up. So like this, we were able to do this, and a lot of companies stepped up to it. And initially prices were quite high because things were not available. And we had to import things by air, and a lot of people did profiteering, even abroad. When they supplied us things, they increased the prices because of the situations. So there has been a downward trend now, luckily for the nation. The prices have come down drastically, and this is helping the people in a big way. And in this process, some things have to be done so that the manufacturers who have been affected due to the huge excess inventory that people have, I mean, even we have a massive inventory sitting with us bought at very high prices. But so anyway, so that has to be dealt with. And in the existing scenario, the ramp up process is still going on. And another thing that our company as well as the other diagnostic companies could do is, as the new tests come in from foreign or MNC manufacturers, we could give them a very affordable, high quality base to partner with them and make these tests available in India.
So just quickly on that, do you think that there is a possibility of creating a better quality standard in India, or will that help in getting all our manufacturers to a level playing field in the global arena?
Yes, that definitely would be very helpful. Because what happened is there was a scramble to make these items or kits and many things, not just the testing kits, but PPEs, the sanitizers, and so many things. So a lot of people jumped onto this, and people who didn't have experience doing these things, or people who didn't have the infrastructure, and even people who actually weren't manufacturers. So there were people who came to us. There were certain organizations that came to us and said, "Hey, I won this tender, but I do not manufacture. So can you manufacture for me?" So such things should not happen, because the product, once approved by ICMR and manufactured by a company, and when it goes into the market, should be periodically tested, so that the quality of any product which is once approved is also governed over a period of time.
Thanks. I think, Chetan, maybe if it would be helpful if you can also show, because Syngene came in, I think was not really a testing company, a regular pathology company, but you became one of the leading testing companies in this space. And also, I think you've also developed kits, right? So it would be helpful to get your views on this as well.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Anu, for inviting me for this panel, and good afternoon to all. So let me very briefly talk about what Syngene has done over the last 4 months or so. So as you very rightly said, we are a contract research company. We are not into diagnostic testing business as a business. But as a response to the pandemic, in about 6 weeks after we decided, we converted one of our research lab into a COVID testing lab. We got the training done, we got the enable approval for that facility, and got the ICMR approval to start testing. And in the last 4 months, we have tested over 65,000 samples, about 50,000 of which have been tested as our CSR initiative, as a CSR contribution to the Karnataka state, this thing. In addition to that, we have started our internal testing of our employees, to the point that we talked about bringing employees back safely. It's something that we have really taken up very, very seriously. So we have come up with protocols that we got approved from the local authorities, and we test our employees frequently every 2 weeks in a proactive manner, whether it's symptomatic or asymptomatic, doesn't matter. So that's one element that we did for testing. In addition to internal testing, we now also offering this RT-PCR testing to several other corporates in Bangalore. So that also is helping other companies to be sure about their employees and their security on their campuses. In addition to that, we have also been able to develop and produce oligonucleotides, primers, and probes that we supply to other manufacturers of kits. We developed S protein in our discovery biology group, which we have been able to partner with other companies. And I'm happy also to talk about our partnership that we did with HiMedia to develop the IgG ELISA assay that we developed together. So we developed that assay ourselves, and then we handed over that assay to HiMedia for further scale up and manufacturing and distribution. And Vishal perhaps can add on that. So it got approved by ICMR recently, and it should hit the market shortly. So lots of different work that we have been able to do over the last 4 months in this situation.
That's awesome. So I think in this, while we are, we've seen Indian manufacturers scale. I just wanted to ask Amit, do you think that this whole ban on imports has impacted multinationals such as Thermo, or has that, has that impacted everybody the same way? What are your thoughts on that?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
So I was saying that, there has been, like we mentioned, I think there's been a lot of scale up within the Indian manufacturing itself. But at the same time, I think there were a lot of discriminatory ban on imports also. And since a lot of multinationals, do you think that there was a problem in importing things to India? And was that a problem as we saw, as we had to scale up?
No, so I did not. We did not feel any discriminatory ban. Of course, there's many central government tenders now which which insist on minimum 50% value addition, make in India sort of situation. I think the scale of the problem is so big that there's a role for everybody, right? And I'm so delighted that we have had manufacturers like HiMedia and Syngene scaling up for the Indian requirements, right. And I remember way back in the middle of March when the first time, I think 15th of March was when the US FDA approved our kit for emergency use authorization. And we worked day and night to get that emergency authorization in India. And by end of March, we had a few lakh kits already in India, supplied to more than 40 customers, and Syngene was one of them. And the interesting thing is that the scale up that happened from a few thousand tests to something like 12 lakh tests per day, it has taken a lot of effort from everyone. So I think there's a role that everyone has had to play. And we are so grateful for the Indian manufacturers for doing an amazing job in scaling up, like HiMedia, in this whole process. But I think Thermo Fisher has had a role to play as well. And we have not really seen that ban on imports or insistence on make in India impact us, because we are known as a very, very high quality manufacturer with a gold standard in testing quality and very high specificity. And our business has actually, our ability to partner with many central government institutions, state governments, private labs, hospitals, medical colleges, has seen us, us supplying us more and more of the requirements of the country. So that hasn't really impacted us in any major way.
So I guess the ban was primarily on the products that make the final product, I guess. So I think we mentioned, Chetan, you mentioned briefly about pool testing and how you've been able to do that in Bangalore. MapMyGenome has been doing it in Hyderabad, for instance, but we're not finding a large number of takers for it yet, right? And maybe that has something to do with, where the infection rates are and so on. But do you have any way of how we can make this much more, much more available to people so that they can actually do this?
Certainly. So the perspective is as follows, because we had initially shortage of number of tests that were available. So ICMR came up with recommendation that you should only test symptomatic people, or people who are high risk or high exposure. And when the prevalence of condition is more than 2% or 4% and something like that in the population, then pooling methodology really doesn't work, because when you pool 5 samples together and run it in one reaction, but if there are too many positives in that, you have to deconvolute and run those again. So it becomes no longer effective. But however, as the testing scales up and companies start to test their asymptomatic employees in a large hordes to be sure about their campuses and security, pooling will certainly help. Suppose if there is a campus which has 10,000 employees who a manufacturer wants to bring back, so instead of running 10,000 separate reactions, they can run 2,000 reactions and determine maybe some could be positive, but several in one go, you should be sure that they are okay and they can come back to work. So when this kind of scaled up, recently you might have noticed that ICMR also has, or not ICMR, but Ministry of Health announced a new notification where COVID RT-PCR testing can also be done as testing on demand. So when that opens up further, and when the state governments also open up to that level, then in such population pooling can be seen, and there will be traction again to that. But again, the point about, as India sees more and more prevalence, then it's a fine balance between prevalence and the kind of people that you test.
Dr. Shahid, do you think that we have been testing enough people? And do you think that there is a possibility that, if we did do a larger, whether it's pool testing or other forms of mass testing, that we would be able to be able to contain this better? Because clearly, I think, we were not allowed to test asymptomatics till very recently, right? So how do we now, given the situation where we are, is there a possibility that we'll be able to do this better? You're muted. I think, let me.
Yeah, so firstly, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So you have to know what's out there. And the other question which is often asked is, how much is enough testing? And we've often heard this narrative from government that we are doing 1 million tests a day. Yes, no one argues that capacity has increased tremendously over the last few months. And that's really good. And that's because of the hard work and innovation of companies that are on the panel today, and research institutes that have practically shut down everything else to do this. But how much is enough? And if you go by WHO guidelines, you should be finding one positive after 20 tests. India is currently finding one positive after 11 to 12 tests, which means that we really need to be doing more. There's no two ways about it. The other issue is really, I mean, pool testing was talked about, and I agree with Chetan that pool testing is good thing to do, but as time goes on, it will provide diminishing returns. So I think the time for pool testing is quickly getting over. The strategies have been there. I know NCBS and IIT Delhi, I believe, worked on a AI-based pooling strategy. And so, various innovative platforms are available, but still the approval is only to pool 5 tests. So the point is that we have to be nimble. Policy has to be nimble. And if policy doesn't move with time, then you're always catching up. And that's essentially what we're doing. The infection is moving ahead of testing right now. We just have to scale up and catch up. There are no two ways about it.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I think it's very important that we scale up rapidly, because I think even though numbers wise, it seems like we have scaled up, I think it is nowhere close to like what China and others did, where they could test an entire city in 3 days or 4 days. So I think there's a possibility. I think we have to make sure that all the hurdles that have been there, whether it is in terms of the incentivizing of maybe different how state governments and others are incentivized, I think maybe there needs to be some change or a policy view on where that goes. But I think, I remember, Dr. Shahid, one more thing that I read a paper of yours, and you've written over there that, the virus is not discriminatory, but it does somehow tend to, and that has stuck with me from since I read it. So clearly, do you think that, are we doing something wrong in terms of looking at the health of everybody? Because clearly the virus will spread, but it has spread more in the slums and in poorer people than in other places. And maybe it would be great to hear your views on that.
Well, when I said the virus is not discriminatory, it was at a time when royals were getting infected, prime ministers were getting infected, just like the common man on the street. It is a given fact that people who are from vulnerable sections of society, people who are malnourished, people who have other morbidities, will have much worse outcomes. Age is another factor, and that's another story, why India and possibly all of South Asia has low mortality. That age may have to do with it. So, we have to understand how the virus came in the country and how it has spread. The virus arrived in the country through international airports. We were pretty lax in screening at international airports. Initially, if you remember, in February and even in March, all we were doing is taking temperatures at airports. And it doesn't take a genius to take a paracetamol before you land at an international airport. So somehow at that point, we had not understood the implications of this. That was the entry point. The virus was still contained in large cities like Delhi, Mumbai. Bangalore actually came in much later. And then the lockdown happened at 4 hours notice. Everything shut down. Livelihoods were completely destroyed. There was no support coming, for people to go home, to be fed. And, the problem with us scientists and technocrats is that our eye is completely on the technology wall, and we forget the social dimensions, and we forget the the human aspects of an outbreak. Controlling pandemics is as much about building trust and as much about understanding social dimensions as it is about technology. And that is possibly where I think we lost the narrative.
True. I agree. So let me get on to one point, which is, I think, something that we've often seen in India, and that is price control. And I think price control has been brought about for making sure that it gives access to a lot of the average consumer to get access to maybe better testing, better hospital facilities, and so on. But at the same time, I think it can sometimes go the wrong way. And if there is fair market, there is possibility that the right price point will anyway come up in the market. I'd like to hear from all the panelists, especially Chetan and Vishal, and also Amit, whether these price controls are the best way to make this mass testing available to the consumer, or whether there were a better way for us to be able to get to the same outcome where it is not adversely affecting good quality manufacturers.
Maybe let me make a comment on that. Yes, price control, especially with RT-PCR test. Initially it started with almost 4,500 rupees, and then many states reduced it to 2,000 rupees, or now progressively it will even go down. And initially the kits that were there for RT-PCR, they were expensive. They also have come down on price over a period of time. But to your point, making the RT-PCR test available in private sector at a reasonable price is a narrative that governments or the states will have to run, because they want to make it available to the poorer sections of the society. But from the lab perspective, running those PCR machines, the overhead and all other costs are there. There are some fixed costs are there. So one needs to find the right trade-off between where the RT-PCR, what could be the right price. But as the tests more and more become available and more PCR machines come online, so then it should automatically settle at the right price. From Syngene perspective, because our intent was really not to use this RT-PCR as a commercial offering, but as I mentioned initially, we did 50,000 tests gratis as part of our CSR. So for us, it was not a matter of worry about what price the private labs are getting. But many other private labs who sort of started with expectation of 4,500, and when they saw the pricing got decline over a period of time very, very rapidly. Within few weeks, that there used to be new price that you have to sell. So that has impacted some of the labs, is what I would say.
I think Thermo Fisher has always been a very, very responsible company, and when we were one of the first ones to start launching the kits, and our kits were priced very, very reasonably. We had Indian manufacturers at that time who were offering kits at double the price of what we were selling. So clearly there was a lot of profiteering, in inverted commas, happening in March, April, May. We never resorted to those kinds of practice, and our pricing has been very responsible and very transparent right throughout. One price for everyone, all customers, whether big or small. I think price control has a role in India. Whether it's the right thing to do, it's a moot point. I think we can debate forever. But it does set it does set benchmarks for volume growth, and I agree with Chetan's point that I think even without price control, the speed at which we have moved. I mean, there are 115 test kit RT-PCR test kit manufacturers approved by ICMR as of today. Pricing has indeed come down. I don't want to comment on quality, and I hope that many of these manufacturers are able to maintain the quality that they get their approvals with. But definitely pricing has come down. And I think the market would have automatically found its newer price even without price control. So price control has always had an important part in India's medical devices, diagnostics, and pharmaceuticals industry. It's always been price driven. So I don't want to comment on the good thing, whether it's good or bad, but I think the market would have found its new normal anyway, even without the price control.
Vishal, you have something to add to that?
Yes. So see, as they say in sports, may the best person win. So the same applies, I guess, in the manufacturing sector, where because of the intense competition, anyway, the prices will come down. And as Amit mentioned, they will find their lower normal. They will come down as there is competition. But now we are looking at a couple of things here. One is we need to factor quality into the price. So some kind of margin has to be accommodated for a certain benchmark quality that has to be governed. Second, in the Atmanirbhar clarion call that was given by our Honorable Prime Minister, a lot of people who were not equipped with the infrastructure and with the raw materials at that point jumped into it. And this happened in the months of April, May, even June, when the prices were sky high, the supplies were short, the demand was very high. And if you had to scale up, you had to invest. And it's a scope versus cost versus time, as the classic project management triangle goes. So when you're crunched on time, you have to spend much more on money. So a lot of companies built up stocks and they have purchased materials at a very high price. And they are sitting with these stocks now. It is good. The prices coming down is a good thing. Quality should be offered at affordable prices, and that will anyway happen. But we need a pressure valve, like a pressure cooker, to let the steam off. Because when companies are competing with each other, as well as with imports that have come in from abroad, imports have come in from China, even after the ban, they came via Malaysia or via Singapore or via Hong Kong. So things did get into the country and they did get, dumped in the market at lower prices. So the price really collapsed. But there was a concomitant ban on export of kits, PPEs, and many things that happened, which is understandable in the sense that the government wanted to protect the Indian population and protect the supply chains. But what I feel now is that we have enough bandwidth, we have enough capacities to manufacture. if needed, if the testing labs ramp up in their capacity to test, the suppliers like us can always produce more than enough kits and supply to them. So somewhere to balance the whole thing out, the government should give a leeway to allow us to export also, because if we have stocks purchased at very expensive prices in the interim period, it has to be evened off somewhere. We need, because the prices are going further down, and then it messes the entire costing scenario and the profitability, and some smaller and medium player companies actually have been pushed out of the business because they couldn't survive. So I don't want to comment on the price control, but the prices will go down. As they are going down, people are benefiting, which is a very good thing. If exports happen, then a lot of companies can adjust and supply good quality material. This is what HiMedia has been doing for so many years. We have been playing Robin Hood because people ask us, how do you manage to sell at such low prices and very good quality? So what we do is we give it affordable prices in India, but we export to 150 countries all over the world, where we export in dollar and euro, which is 85 rupees and 90 rupees the pound, you know. So that's where we make the margins. So if this is allowed, a lot of Indian companies could actually export, recover some prices, and also keep supporting mass production in India and recover their money and give affordable prices.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. So I think I would, yeah, go ahead.
If I can just add something here, you know, hearing you know, people from industry, it reminds me of a scenario that our pharma sector is facing. You know, today, India may be the biggest generic drug manufacturer, but India imports 80% of its active pharmaceutical ingredients, largely from China. In 1991, India imported only 3% of APIs. Today, we import 80%. And all of that is because our pharma companies are asked to sell Crocin at 1 rupee or 2 rupees. So there has to be a good balance. Today, the fact is that Indian pharma doesn't find it affordable to produce APIs. So there has to be a good balance looking at the future.
I totally agree. I think I'm very familiar with the API industry, given our family is involved in that. And I'm also we've also, MapMyGenome got into testing. So I can fully understand, because we were allowed to start testing in June. Luckily, Telangana hasn't made too much fluctuations. I think that has remained, but I've seen a lot of states going from 4,500 all the way to 2,500 to 1,600, which basically means that there is no room for somebody who at least planned for quality of a variety of things. So it's important that, you know, while they can do that for someone who's ready to do it along with the right quality parameters, I think it's important to make sure that there's survival of some of these players that are there. So I think we have about 10-15 minutes left, and I wanted to ask one question to all of you, and that was that if you were the chief decision maker of the country and you could decide everything that was there for opening up the economy, what is that one thing you would do to change what we have done so far? But what would one thing you could have done to open up the economy with regards to testing, of course? Who wants to go? Amit, go ahead.
Let me go first here. So I think from my perspective, it's been very clear that the more we test, the more we can safely bring people back to work. In the US, there are already models happening. There is a proposal to allow non-CLIA labs, non-CLIA labs in organizations to start doing RT-PCR testing. And there are organizations like Amazon, Google, Disney, they're already looking at many models where they can test whether it's antigen or RT-PCR at bulk scale. So for example, in the future, you may have all entrants to Disney's theme parks being tested on a rapid test. So I think as long as we have COVID with us and we don't have a viable vaccine, the one way to open up the economy is to democratize testing, to open it up. The Indian government has now opened it up, but we could have opened it up even earlier and scaled up testing much faster. So I think that is the one clear way of opening up the economy is to increase testing, which gives more control, more ability for organizations to test their own employees, screen them better, and even the asymptomatics, and then find a way to reduce the spread of the infection.
I also completely echo with what Amit mentioned. Scaling up testing, perhaps double. If you're doing 1 million tests today, perhaps we have to go to maybe 2 million or more than that to be able to cope up and bring company employees back to work. And our own experience about proactive testing has really told us that if you keep on testing your people, whether they are symptomatic or asymptomatic, repeatedly again and again, every 14 days or every week or whatever frequency that you can do, you can potentially create bubble within your environment, so that you isolate asymptomatic people early and make your campuses secure. So that is something that we will really want to drive any government or any decision makers to do that. So I completely echo with what Amit mentioned.
Shahid, you want to go next? Or?
Maybe I'll come after Vishal.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Couple of things. One is
you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah. Thank you, sir. So couple of things. One is we need to screen more. If we do more of serological surveys, that would help. The thrust on screening the population for antibodies is not there right now. Of course, there are many pros and cons about an immune response being a T-cell based or antibody based, whether we should look at the antibodies or the neutralizing antibodies are more important and things of that sort. But definitely we need to do serosurveillance. We need to screen the population en masse to look for immunity passports and open up the economy and then get people together and they can work. Also, people are also talking of reinfections. Now, even if there are reinfections, in quite a few anecdotal cases, there have been reinfections reported and studied well. These are mild. So there is no need to also think that what's the point of testing if you're going to get it again, or even do a serosurveillance if you're going to get it again anyway and get infected. But the reinfections are mild. So one has to do serosurveillance and test. Okay, now a point other than this, as Dr. Jameel mentioned, the disease is ahead of us. It's kind of running ahead of us, and we really need to catch up with it. And with the winter coming, the second wave happening in European nations, in America, and in India, the double whammy of swine flu with COVID, that's beginning to happen. And that's not a nice thing to have at all. So what I would say is the police need to get out on the streets and whack people who don't wear masks. Because I see so many people without masks out there. If we don't curtail that and put some draconian measures in place, we will just be talking of testing and trying to play catch up all the time when the common men on the streets are just merrily going about as if they don't care. So that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. So I do agree with the sentiments that have been echoed here, except for the last bit that Vishal said. Of course you need to test more, but do remember that the testing that you're talking about, companies, that's a small sector of our economy. 90% of India works in the informal sector. How do you test them is an issue that we must grapple with. Where I differ with you, Amit, is I agree that masks are today the most important intervention. Don't wait for that vaccine. Don't wait for that herd immunity. Protect yourself, your co-workers, your family today. And the only way you can do that is if everyone wears a mask. The critical mistake I think our country made was to turn a public health problem into a law and order problem. So that's where, Vishal, I differ with you. Police doesn't have to be on the street with danda to enforce masks. We have to build trust and communicate properly to people so that they wear a mask. Every day when you hear this narrative from the government that our death rate is very low, our recovery rate is very high, it gives a false sense of complacency. And that is what is driving this behavior. So I fully agree with you, masks are important, but I would rather go ahead and build trust and communicate properly so that people want to wear masks, not because they have to wear a mask.
Yeah, I agree. I think Singapore had done a much, I guess it's a much smaller country, but I remember when it had just come out, when COVID had just been announced, I was in Singapore and I was coming out. And one of the first things they did was to send a package of masks, sanitizers, and a few other things to every home. I think that sends a better message, even though, I think, and because that is there along with some information, I think they were able to communicate some of that a little bit better. So I think we need to definitely understand that not everybody, one reads the same language in India also, right? I mean, everybody doesn't communicate in English or Hindi or that. But one of the other things that I would also do is that, there have been a lot of the healthcare workers that have been also, unjustly, being affected by something like this. And while it is becoming probably better in terms of the availability of some of their protective equipment, I think it's important that at least people who are serving the nation, whether it is in the form of collecting swabs, or whether in the form of actually treating patients, people who come in contact with a lot of, actual COVID patients, I think they also get some protection in some form. I think that is important. But many of you, I think, Vishal, you brought up the immunity passports. I think we also, people are now starting to look at also the T-cell immunity and whether there is a possibility of being able to test, that in a low-cost manner. And I think if you're able to do a combination of that, it would be a great complement to be able to add that to the RT-PCR efforts that are going on. So I'm hoping that, along with the point of care methods like the TrueNat, your Abbott, your Bosch and others that have been coming up, we'd be able to start seeing a lot more with a higher sensitivity and specificity. But until then, I think one of the good things has been that, for instance, we have just opened up in Hyderabad airport and we were able to turn around, even with transport, I think turn it around in less than 4 hours. So I think RT-PCR is definitely becoming a point where we are able to quickly turn it around and send it to them, and maybe even bring it down to 1.5, 2 hours as well. So I think there is a possibility of being able to do something like that also. But I think there's a combination of all of these that is required for us to get to where we want to get. And I think all of us, one thing that all of us agree is that we still need to increase the testing. And a good benchmark was, 1 in 20, one positive out of every 20. I think that should be a good benchmark for us to look at, rather than look at the positivity rate, rather than look at telling people not to prescribe and all of that. So I think if the intent is to catch the virus, I think it is to be able to use measures that are allowing us to scale up without punishing anybody in that process. So I think thanks. I think this has been a very, very, very fruitful discussion. And I don't know, Sapna, if you had more questions or something for us to answer.
No, I don't have, until unless we have, is Mr. Mahapatra there or anybody else who could ask questions? Otherwise, I think we can wrap it up.
Okay.
If no further closing comments from anybody, I think you did the closing comments very well. So that's it. And we do agree that testing, like I began with, is the only solution for this. That is what we understand. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we thank our distinguished moderator, Ms. Acharya, all our eminent panelists, Mr. Amit Chopra, Ms. Dr. Shahid Jameel, Dr. Chetan Tamhankar, and Dr. Vishal Warke, for your participation and your valuable comments that we had in this panel discussion. Thank you once again, everybody. And with that, we close the proceedings. Thanks. And ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow again we begin the proceedings of the panel discussion at 10 a.m. The first panel being making COVID-19 vaccination an equity reality. The second one at 11 o'clock will be biopharma manufacturing, a promising global opportunity for Asian and global players. And at 4 o'clock, we have Indian startups leading the fight against COVID-19. And finally, boosting immunity through Ayurveda, which will also be graced by Secretary Ministry of Ayush, President Ayurvedic Drug Manufacturers Association, Ayush Companies, Mr. Vaidya Rajesh Kutecha. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, closing our session now. And once again, urging and requesting all our participants to kindly visit the exhibitors. And we thank all our exhibitors and panelists and all our participants for being here with us in this virtual event that we had. Again, thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Have a good day, good evening, and
Thank you.
namaskar.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Welcome,
much.
sir. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.